A 24-year-old comes to my clinic with a label already attached: type 2 diabetes. Body mass index 27, not lean, not heavy. The diagnosis was made 8 months ago, and metformin was started. Since then, the A1C has not fallen. It has climbed from 7.9 to 11.4%, despite real adherence. And today there are 2 new findings: moderate urine ketones, and 12 pounds of unintentional weight loss. The clinic reflex here is to add a second agent. Maybe a sulfonylurea, because the glucose is high and something needs to happen today. That reflex is the mistake. Because nothing about this trajectory behaves like type 2 diabetes, not the speed, not the ketones, not the weight loss while the sugar climbs. And the 2 tests that settle it, a pair of antibodies and a C-peptide, have still never been ordered. Over the next 20 minutes I want to rebuild how you think about type 1 diabetes in 2026, because this is no longer just the insulin talk. Type 1 is now a stage disease you can diagnose before symptoms, with an approved therapy at stage 2. The ADA has made automated insulin delivery the default for essentially everyone. And the board-relevant skill is classification, getting the label right before the wrong label costs your patient 8 months of beta cells. Everything you will hear is verified against the ADA Standards of Care 2026 and current FDA labeling. And at the end, we come back to her. The first paradigm shift: type 1 diabetes is a stage disease, and 2 of the 3 stages have no symptoms at all. Stage 1, autoimmunity has begun. 2 or more islet autoantibodies are present, but glucose is completely normal. Stage 2, the antibodies are there and glucose is now abnormal, a fasting glucose of 100 to 125, a 2-hour value of 140 to 199, an A1C of 5.7 to 6.4, or a 10% relative rise in A1C, but still no symptoms. Stage 3 is the disease you were taught: overt hypoglycemia, symptoms, the day insulin starts. Who do I screen? The ADA is explicit: offer autoantibody screening to people with a family history of type 1 diabetes or known elevated genetic risk. This is targeted screening, not population-wide. The panel is for antibodies: insulin, glutamic acid decarboxylase, insulinoma-associated antigen 2, and zinc transporter 8. Now the part the boards will test. Multiple confirmed antibodies without overt diabetes means high progression risk. Refer for metabolic staging, education, and consideration of prevention trials or approved therapy. That therapy exists, and it is slide 4. And know the carve-out: a single confirmed insulinoma-associated antigen 2 antibody is monitored like multiple antibody disease, because that one antibody independently predicts progression. Any other single antibody gets repeat testing every 6 months to 3 years, depending on age. Stage 2 is not a diagnosis of diabetes. But it is no longer something you just watch. So an adult presents with diabetes and the phenotype overlaps. How do I classify correctly? The ADA flowchart starts with antibodies. Measure glutamic acid decarboxylase first. If it is negative, follow with insulinoma-associated antigen 2 and zinc transporter 8. Insulin antibodies only count if the patient has never been on insulin. Exogenous insulin makes them meaningless. And know the exception: under age 35, without features of type 2 or monogenic diabetes, a negative panel does not change the diagnosis. 5 to 10% of type 1 is antibody negative. C-peptide is the second test, and it has rules. It is only indicated once someone is on insulin treatment. A random sample works. Draw it with a concurrent glucose within 5 hours of eating. 600 picomoles per liter or above, that's 1.8 nanograms per milliliter, argues strongly for preserved secretion, whatever the circumstances. Below 80 picomoles is severe insulin deficiency that never needs repeating. And never interpret a C-peptide drawn within 2 weeks of a hypoglycemic emergency. Glucotoxicity suppresses it. 3 mimics. Latent autoimmune diabetes in adults. LADA is immune diabetes on a slow fuse, adult onset, antibody positive, and it does not need insulin at first, which is exactly how it gets mislabeled. Ketosis-prone type 2, the Flatbush phenotype, presents with DKA, often in patients with obesity and a strong family history, then comes off insulin, antibodies negative, C-peptide recovered. And think monogenic diabetes when the story is wrong for both. A1C under 7.5 at diagnosis, a parent with diabetes, no autoimmunity, no metabolic syndrome. Anyone diagnosed under 6 months of age gets genetic testing, that is neonatal diabetes until proven otherwise, and many of those children belong on a sulfonylurea, not insulin. Teplizumab is the reason stage 2 is treatable, and its label moved twice this year, so let me give you the current version. Read off the June 2026 prescribing information. It is a CD3-directed antibody that modulates the T-cell attack on beta cells. The timeline, November 2022, approved to delay the onset of stage 3 in patients 8 and older with stage 2 disease. April 2026, that stage 2 indication expanded down to age 1. And June 12, 2026, accelerated approval for a brand new population, children 8 through 17 recently diagnosed with stage 3, to delay the decline of their remaining insulin production. That is the first disease-modifying therapy for new-onset disease. 2 different regimens, and the boards will mix them up. Stage 2, a single 14-day intravenous course. Recently diagnosed stage 3, 2 12-day courses, the second 6 months after the first. For that stage 3 indication, confirm at least 1 islet autoantibody and a peak C-peptide of 0.2 picomoles per milliliter or more on a mixed meal tolerance test. The approval rests on C-peptide preservation. In the PROTECT trial, 328 children, the decline slowed significantly, and continued approval is contingent on a confirmatory trial. That is what accelerated approval means. Safety, and this changed in June. Teplizumab now carries a boxed warning for serious, sometimes life-threatening viral reactivation, Epstein-Barr and cytomegalovirus. Test for active infection, including viral loads. Before starting, it is contraindicated in the immunocompromised or inactive infection. Get a blood count and liver enzymes at baseline, watch lymphocytes, discontinue for prolonged severe lymphopenia, complete age-appropriate vaccinations before the first dose, and keep watching for reactivation for at least 2 months after the last infusion. One nuance for the boards, the 2026 standards still say teplizumab is not indicated for established stage 3. Both things are true. Recently diagnosed is not established. Stage 3 means insulin, so let me build the regimen the way I build it in clinic. For most adults with type 1, the ADA recommends either a pump or multiple daily injections, prandial plus basal, and insulin analogues are preferred over human insulins because they cause less hypoglycemia. That is grade A, both of them. The logic: basal insulin holds the overnight and between meal glucose, roughly 30 to 50% of the total daily dose. Prandial insulin covers meals, matched to carbohydrate, and the standards now explicitly want patients taught to account for fat and protein too. Correction insulin fixes the number in front of you, dosed from the insulin sensitivity factor, how far 1 unit is expected to drop the glucose. The starting numbers worth memorizing: total daily dose, about 0.4 to 1 unit per kilogram. A typical metabolically stable adult starts near 0.5, half basal, half prandial. Newly diagnosed and still in the honeymoon, start lower, 0.2 to 0.6, because endogenous insulin is still there. Why does sliding scale alone keep failing? Because it is purely reactive, it chases glucose that already happened, with no basal layer and no meal coverage. Ketosis does not wait for a high reading, it follows insulin absence, and in type 1 the absence is absolute. 2 practical points I never skip. Rotate injection and infusion sites. Lipohypertrophy makes absorption erratic and is a hidden cause of unexplained hypoglycemia. And use 4mm pen needles. Intramuscular injection turns a predictable analog into an unpredictable one. Reassess the regimen every 3 to 6 months. Insulin needs change, the plan should too. The second paradigm shift: continuous glucose monitoring is no longer an upgrade. The 2026 standards recommend it at diagnosis and at any point after, for anyone on insulin. Grade A. So the metrics it produces are now board material. For numbers, and I want them memorized as a set: 70, 4, 1, 36. Time in range at 70 to 180, the goal is more than 70% of the day. Time below range, under 70 should be less than 4% and under 54 less than 1%. And 36 is the ceiling for the coefficient of variation. Above that, the swings themselves are the problem. Time above range rounds it out: over 180 less than a quarter of the day, over 250 less than 5%. Two more terms. The glucose management indicator is the A1C equivalent the sensor actually measured, and it frequently disagrees with the laboratory A1C, which is exactly the blind spot to know A1C is an average, and averages hide hypoglycemia. When A1C is unreliable, fructosamine or the sensor metrics themselves are the sanctioned alternatives. And the ambulatory glucose profile, the AGP, is the one-page report where all of this lives. Two populations get different targets, and both are favorite exam pivots. Older or medically complex adults, time in range over 50% is enough, and time under 70 must stay under 1%, hypoglycemia protection dominates. Pregnancy with type 1, the range itself narrows to 63 to 140, with the same 70% goal and tighter limits below range. 2026 footnote: an over-the-counter sensor is now cleared for children as young as 2. The technology is moving, the 4 numbers are the constant. Here is the third paradigm shift, and the one I most want you to carry out of this video. The 2026 standards state it plainly: automated insulin delivery is the standard of care for people with type 1 diabetes who can use it safely, and it should be the preferred method of insulin delivery. Not an option for the motivated few. The default. An automated insulin delivery system is 3 components talking to each other: a pump, a continuous glucose sensor, and an algorithm that adjusts insulin in real time. The pivotal trials are consistent: more time in range, especially overnight, less hypoglycemia, lower A1C, and the biggest gains land in the people starting with the worst control. Now the deletion countdown, because clinicians still reflexively order these 3 things. Gate 1, a C-Peptide level. Deleted. Gate 2, islet autoantibody confirmation. Deleted. Gate 3, a minimum duration of insulin therapy. Deleted. New recommendation 7.8a says there is no requirement for any of the 3 before starting a pump or an automated system. 2 obligations come with it. When I prescribe one of these systems, education on use and troubleshooting is mandatory, at regular intervals. The technology without the training is a hazard, and the next slide is about exactly that. And if a patient shows up running an open-source system, community-built algorithms, the standards tell me to support them and keep giving diabetes management advice, not to abandon them. Grade B. The published Type 2 video covered the sensor expansion. This is the deeper layer. The question on rounds is no longer is this patient a pump candidate. It is what is keeping this patient off automated delivery. It is 2 in the morning and the technology just failed. This is the slide the pump clinic teaches on day 1, and the boards test it because it kills. Failure 1, the infusion site. A kinked cannula or a dislodged set means insulin delivery stops, and a pump holds only rapid-acting insulin, so there is no basal reserve. Ketones can build within hours. Unexplained highs that do not respond to a correction bolus mean change the site, give insulin by injection, and check ketones. That sequence, set change, injection, ketones, is the order the exam wants. Failure 2, the sensor that lies. Continuous sensors read interstitial fluid, which lags behind blood, especially when glucose is falling fast. A double-down arrow is a warning, not a diagnosis. If the number does not match how the patient feels, confirm with a fingerstick before treating. Every sensor system still requires blood glucose backup for exactly this situation. Failure 3, DKA on a pump. Same disease, faster onset, because interrupted rapid-acting delivery leaves nothing behind. Any pump patient with nausea, vomiting, or ketones gets evaluated as DKA until proven otherwise, and the pump comes off. Which brings me to the non-negotiable: every patient on a pump or automated system leaves my clinic with a written backup plan, basal and rapid-acting pens, current doses, and sick day rules. Illness means more monitoring, ketone checks for anyone ketosis prone, and knowing when to hold other agents, metformin and SGLT2 inhibitors when intake is down or kidneys are at risk. And one inpatient rule: hospitalized patients keep their own devices when it is clinically appropriate, with confirmatory point-of-care glucose for dosing decisions. Hypoglycemia is the other edge of insulin therapy, and the classification is 3 levels. Know them cold, because only 2 of them have a number. Level 1, glucose under 70, but 54 or above. Level 2, under 54, that is the clinically significant threshold, the one that maps to harm. Level 3 has no number at all, a severe event, altered mental or physical status, requiring another person's help, whatever the glucose reads. Screen for impaired awareness at least yearly. The patient with long-standing type 1 who stops feeling lows has lost the warning system, and their target is not tighter control, it is avoiding the next level 3. Treatment: at 70 or below, 15 grams of fast carbohydrate, recheck in 15 minutes, repeat if needed. Pure glucose is preferred. 2 refinements: patients on automated delivery usually need only 5 to 10 grams, because the algorithm has already pulled insulin back. And anyone on a carbose must use glucose itself. The drug blocks sucrose breakdown, so juice and table sugar arrive too late. Then rescue therapy, and this is where 2026 looks nothing like the old red kit. Glucagon now comes as a nasal powder, 3 mg, no injection at all, a ready-to-use pre-filled pen or syringe, and dasiglucan, a stable analog in a pre-filled pen. No reconstitution, no 11 steps while your patient seizes. If a family has never practiced with one of these, that is a gap, close it at the next visit. And an unresponsive patient means emergency services, not more oral sugar. Last, the counseling that protects livelihoods, driving and safety-critical work. A sensor alarm is a pullover now instruction, and a level 3 event is a licensing conversation. Document that you had it. Diabetic ketoacidosis in type 1 is a disease of missing insulin, and the precipitant list is short enough to memorize: missed or underdosed insulin, intercurrent illness, new onset disease, and, from slide 8, interrupted pump delivery. The 2026 standards expanded this section precisely because so much of DKA is preventable upstream: sick day rules, ketone monitoring when ill, and never letting a vomiting patient simply stop insulin. Now the pattern that fools people: euglycemic DKA. Ketoacidosis with a glucose under 250, sometimes nearly normal. The mechanism is insulin deficiency with a glucose-lowering force on top: pregnancy, prolonged fasting, heavy alcohol, or an SGLT2 inhibitor. The board stem gives you a glucose that looks fine and a patient who looks terrible: nausea, tachypnea, a wide anion gap. A normal glucose does not exclude ketoacidosis. Check ketones. That lands on the SGLT2 problem. In type 1 trials, these drugs improved A1C, weight, and blood pressure, and increased DKA. Sotagliflozin raised ketosis rates roughly 8-fold, and it is approved for heart failure and kidney disease but contraindicated in type 1 diabetes. No SGLT2 inhibitor carries a United States indication for type 1. The danger is the off-label prescription, or the patient with misclassified diabetes, like ours, who gets one for type 2. If such a drug is on board and illness or surgery is coming, hold it 3 to 4 days before an operation, and during any acute illness. Management itself, fluids, insulin, potassium, the hunt for the trigger, is its own lecture, and it is coming in the endocrine emergencies video. Today the exam point is recognition: right patient, right precipitant, and the glucose that lies. What exists beyond insulin? For things, one of them mostly as a warning. Pramlintide first, and I teach it as a pharmacology point, not a prescription. It is the amylin analog, approved back in 2005 as an adjunct to mealtime insulin, modest benefit, A1C down 0.3 to 0.4%, a kilogram or 2 of weight. But here is what the gate for this video caught: every United States presentation is now listed as discontinued. The standards still call it approved, you cannot actually prescribe it. Expect it on an exam, do not expect it at a pharmacy. Second, type 1 with obesity, newly addressed in 2026. Recommendation 8.29, apply the general population obesity toolkit, including GLP-1-based therapy, grade B, and metabolic surgery, grade C, to adults with type 1 and obesity. With eyes open, in the liraglutide trials the ketosis risk roughly doubled at the higher dose, and DKA after bariatric surgery runs 15 to 20% in this population. Ketone monitoring and sick day rules are part of the prescription. Third, the one approved cell therapy. Donaslesel, donor islets infused into the portal vein, approved in 2023 for a very narrow adult population, type 1 with repeated severe hypoglycemia despite intensive management. It demands lifelong immunosuppression, up to 3 infusions, and 90% of trial subjects had at least one serious adverse reaction. Real-world availability is essentially single-center. Know that it exists and who it is for. Fourth, the pipeline, and I say this word carefully. Zimislecel, stem cell-derived islets, in the phase 1-2 data, 10 of 12 patients came off insulin entirely at 1 year, with severe hypoglycemia eliminated. Phase 3 is underway and regulatory submissions are expected this year. It is investigational today, no approval anywhere as I record this. Promising, yes. A promise, no. The traps first, these are the discriminations the boards keep charging for. Trap 1, the thin or young or ketotic type 2. Overlap features, younger age, weight loss, ketosis, rapid progression to insulin are an indication for antibody testing, not for a second oral agent. Classification is a test, not a vibe. Trap 2, the sensor arrow. A continuous monitor reads interstitial fluid and it lags. A falling arrow during a rapid drop is not a confirmed low, you match the number to the patient, and confirm with a fingerstick when they disagree. Trap 3, the normal glucose. Euglycemic DKA gives you a readable number and a crashing patient. If the anion gap is wide and ketones are present, the glucose is irrelevant, and an SGLT2 inhibitor in a misclassified patient is often the author of that story. Trap 4, stage 2 is not diabetes, but it is not nothing, either. Multiple confirmed antibodies with dysglycemia is a treatable, referral level finding, and a single confirmed insulinoma-associated antigen 2 antibody earns the same monitoring as multiple. The era of watchful waiting ended when the first therapy arrived. The takeaways, 5 lines. Type 1 is staged, stage 2 is treatable. Classify with antibodies and C-peptide, and respect the C-peptide rules. Automated delivery is the default, no C-peptide, antibody, or duration gates. 70, 4, 1, 36. And when the technology fails, change the site, inject, check ketones, and every patient carries a written backup plan. Hold those 5, and the last slide is the patient we started with. Back to the 24-year-old. 8 months of type 2, an A1C that climbed through metformin to 11.4, moderate ketones, 12 pounds gone. You already know what this is. Adult onset type 1, the LADA pattern. The antibody panel came back positive for glutamic acid decarboxylase, and once insulin started, her C-peptide was low but not absent, drawn correctly, with a concurrent glucose, and nowhere near that ketoacidotic weak. Autoimmune diabetes, moving slower than a child's, mislabeled because she is 24 with a body mass index of 27. So the reflex, add a second agent, was wrong 3 ways. Wrong diagnosis, this was never metformin-responsive disease. Wrong sequence, the antibody panel and the C-peptide should have come before any second drug. And wrong drug class risk, because the fashionable add-on in a young adult is an SGLT2 inhibitor, and in unclassified autoimmune diabetes, that is how you manufacture euglycemic decay. What she actually needed on day 1 was insulin, a sensor, and education. What the 8 months cost her was beta cells she does not get back. That is the whole lecture in one case. Classify first, stage what you find, use the technology, and know what to do when it fails. If this is how you want to work through endocrine cases, that is exactly what we are building at MedBoard Pro, board-style vignettes with the reasoning, not just the answer key. The link is below. And as always, this is education, not medical advice.